So I do feel like we need to have more voices, like Bukele, calling out the US Fed. We need more voices. We need more leaders standing up to US government overreach, because it is only to protect the war machine. It is only to protect their own interests. I mean, we know this, right? It is only to protect the printing, endless money printing, and to protect the power and control that they have in the rest of the world. And it's so entrenched in all of our lives. Think of one thing that you don't need to ask the government for permission for at this point, right? There is so much. So I feel like we need to fight against that. And feel like we need to have more leaders that fight against that. And I think it's Max that always says this, like the dominoes are going to fall. I think it's time that we actually tip them the fuck over and make them fall.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 867359, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, where I talk with my guest about Bitcoin and whatever else comes up. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome back to the show Suriname presidential candidate Maya Parbhoe. Maya first came on the Bitcoin Podcast back in May, and with the Suriname presidential elections only 6 months away, it felt like the right time to get her back on the show. As you'll hear today, Maya is a Bitcoiner and an entrepreneur first, and a politician second. We dig into a lot in this talk, including her plans to make Bitcoin legal tender on day one, her vision for the future of her country, political corruption, government control, radical transparency, grassroots Bitcoin adoption, why it is her goal to make herself as the president irrelevant, and a whole lot more. It is truly inspiring to see young, smart, and optimistic people like Maya running for political office around the world, and I highly recommend you follow her and support her however you can. You can donate to Maya's campaign via the Geyser link in the show notes, or by going directly to geyser.fund/project/Maya2025. Before we dive in, do me a favor and subscribe to the Bitcoin Podcast wherever you're watching or listening. Give the show a boost on Fountain if you find it valuable. And if you're not using Fountain.fm for your podcast, what the heck are you doing? You could be earning Bitcoin just for listening to this show. Check out bitcoinpodcast.net for additional resources and episodes. Head to the show notes to grab discount links for my sponsor Bitbox and other partners, or go directly to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off. And send an email to hello@bitcoinpodcast.net if you have any feedback or if you're interested in sponsoring the Bitcoin Podcast. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin talk with Maya Parbhoe. When did we talk last, Maya? It was it beginning of this year? It feels like it's been a while, and a lot's happened, but it's good to see you again.
Yeah, it has been a while. I do think it's early this year, yeah. I honestly
Yeah,
don't remember. Time has been going so
yeah,
fast. It's like a roller coaster ride.
yeah. And you've been both in Suriname, but then also you were just at Bitcoin Amsterdam, right? The panel there with Frank was awesome. I really enjoyed that, but that looks like it was quite a great event.
Oh yeah. So I decided after volunteering at most of the conferences last year, I just wanted to do whatever I could for adoption, or just to volunteer and, contribute to the community. It kind of a bit, I think, drained and exhausted at the end of it, so I decided this year to only do a few. And they had asked me pretty early on, so I didn't really know what to expect, but it felt like, Amsterdam, it makes sense because we have a large Surinamese community there, almost, the same as our population in Suriname is in the Netherlands. So it seemed like the right place. And then I also get to visit my family who I haven't seen in a year as well. So it gives me the opportunity to see them too. So I picked that one, and I picked adopting Bitcoin, just because, El Salvador, Bitcoin country. So those two for this year. And yeah, it was crazy. It was I didn't expect it to be like that, to be honest. I didn't know that the room would be packed. It was the first conference where my mom came and my dad, or stepdad.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so until now, for her it's been like, oh, okay, she's talking about like her imaginary friends, the Bitcoin community, these people she always talks about. She has no idea who's who or what's really happening. And for her, it was like this realization, like, huh, this thing is real. And I think we were sitting in the last row, and you could kind of hear when I think the panel was at 3:30 p.m. And then like a minute or a few minutes before, you could actually like hear a stampede kind of noise of people like walking up the stairs and then filling the room and then like surrounding the seats and the balcony upstairs. And I was already heading up to the podium to get on stage. And my jury, one of our team members in Dallas, he was sitting with my mom, and my mom goes like, "Why are all these people here?" And then jury goes like, "Yeah, they're here for Maya." And my mom's like, it couldn't process, so she started crying. And apparently she was like, "Huh?" So completely confused as to why people were like cheering, and she was super proud, but I think it was a real shock to them to kind of, because yeah, for them it's intangible. They don't really follow much of what I do up until like this first time where they were actually there. So that was funny.
That's, I mean, I can imagine she's a pretty proud mama. But, I mean, I was obviously not there, but watching the stream, and you definitely had a packed house there. And I think people, like, you could just sense kind of the excitement in the room too. And I think it was, kind of similar to when Bukele was talking about the things the fact that El Salvador was going to be adopting Bitcoin when he was at the conference, 2 or 3 years ago now. And I think people get really excited even when it's not their own, not their own country where this is happening, but because they view it as, okay, this is like another domino that's starting to
Yeah.
fall. This is another potential leader, another presidential candidate who's saying, I believe in Bitcoin, and I believe that Bitcoin is going to do great things for my country. And by the way, my country needs some change, like some drastic change. And I mean, same in El Salvador, and I think very much the same in Suriname. Like there's, from everything you've told me and just from my own research, and there is a lot of corruption there. And that
Yeah.
seems to be, I mean, that's, there's corruption everywhere. But I think oftentimes it's maybe more blatant, it's less hidden in some of these, smaller countries, because they're, the people in power have been in power for a while. They know they can get away with it, and they don't even maybe try to hide it too well anymore. I don't know.
No,
I,
like this government is worse than the last, and it's been getting significantly worse every 5 years. So every elections for the past 15 years, it's been getting significantly worse every cycle. And this government is next level. Like they really do not care. Like healthcare right now is completely gone to shit. And like the Red Cross, for example, they put out a notice in the newspapers today that they don't have all of the equipment or materials that they need to process blood, so they won't be able to do transfusions or anything. Basically, no testing, no transfusions, anything at any of the hospitals in the country. So, and while that's going on, our president is traveling from Curacao to Aruba to Miami and heading to Colombia. Like, and that's one of the things that he actually won the election on. He said he's not going to travel as much. Like, and they're traveling more while everything is collapsing here. So it's like they have no conscience whatsoever. Like, and the minister of health, like, I really wonder how that man sleeps at night, just knowing how many people die and the situation that he's in charge of, and why he's even a minister is still like nobody gets it. And the guy is just so arrogant, like he doesn't care at all. And it has been getting worse and worse and worse. And everybody's just tired. We really do need drastic change similar to El Salvador.
And I have I have a lot of things I want to get into with you today, but maybe for folks who you were on this show before, that still one of my favorite episodes that I've done, and I know it people really liked getting to know you a bit. And so, but I want it for people maybe who have not yet watched that show. Can you just give maybe a little bit of a background on who you are, and but also why you decided to throw your hat in the ring to run for president in Suriname? I mean, running for president is no small task. It opens you up to a ton of potential public scrutiny and attacks and all sorts of things. Like, it's not a decision anyone ever takes lightly. How did you get to this point where you said, I need to run for president?
Well, yeah, so I've been an entrepreneur since I was about 15 years old. I have my family has a pretty um, long legacy in the country, and my dad was a well-known entrepreneur. We were the wealthiest family in the country, and then my dad was murdered, and we lost everything. And then when I was 15, I kind of out of necessity started working, and then wanted a house, wanted a home for me and mom. So started working at 15, and basically just out of something that I myself wanted, I wanted to order, stuff, be able to order stuff on Amazon. Um, Developed an import company, that where you could order stuff online, and people by my friends and other like high-end customers, they could order stuff through me, and I'd get it all the way here. Um, and then about a decade ago, I started another company with my CTO, who's a civil engineer. So diversified into a completely different industry, aside from logistics, into infrastructure. So we started building roads, dams, dikes. We've built several ports, done engineering work on ports. We've done engineering work for F1 track in Dubai. So that was an exciting business, and it was bootstrapped. So we started with zero investment and just grit basically, and we scaled that to about 5.8 million, and that allowed us to invest into something else. And I grew up with tech. My dad was always obsessed with the newest innovations. We had before the computers came out, they already had like he had the telegram, all the stenograph, all of the basically everything that predated even my time. He had all the latest innovations, and I grew up with computers, pulling them apart, putting them back together. I'm the DOS generation, so I grew up playing games on DOS. Um, and then basically, I had this love for tech and math. Like, math was the only class I still attended my graduation year of high school, because I felt like that was the only one that was interesting. And I graduated, and then I selected econometrics, which is also a study that's 99% math, calculus, algebra, matrix algebra, computational modeling, MATLAB. It's all software coding, and math. So out of that, basically that all of that passion for that, I fell in love with Bitcoin when I read the white paper. A friend shared it. Ed shared the white paper with me, and when I read it, I fell in love with the algorithm and the story behind it. Knowing growing up, being a fan of Anonymous, being a fan of anti-establishment, anti-government, and seeing the 2008 crisis and that cycle that keeps happening, .com 2008, every 10 years you have this orchestrated cycle to reboot the market basically. I fell in love with the white paper, but it was still early days, and I was pretty broke at the time, just survival mode, trying to pay the mortgage here at 19% interest. So I just kind of followed it, kept an eye on it. I also thought it's too early. What if a government is able to screw the whole thing up in some way? And then when WikiLeaks happened, that's when I knew this is unstoppable, right? Because every government would want to stop that, but they couldn't prevent donations from being sent. So that's when I kind of knew, like, okay, this is gonna last. It's gonna be forever. Um, and I decided for myself, like, I want to spend the rest of my life working on this. So we had funds to invest, and I looked at, you know, it was developed after the 2008 crisis because of that centralized system, not just reserve, like fractionalized reserve banking, but the whole system. Intercontinental Exchange, Fortress, Intercontinental Exchange owns all the exchanges almost internationally. So they control all of the capital markets globally, and these financial institutions basically control the world's economies. So you look at that system, and then I looked at Suriname, and we have no capital market. We have no developed financial infrastructure whatsoever. I mean, if you look at everything that was developed since PayPal, we have none of that here, right? Like, we barely have websites. We no online payments, no payment processors. Our POS infrastructure is very outdated. So we had none of that at the time. And just based off of my own history, like paying 19% interest on a mortgage, that's also a causality of, an undeveloped capital market. In my own companies, needing to scale from zero bootstrap to 5.8 million, you need funding to finance purchase orders. And we were fortunate enough to get credit from our suppliers, had to do the whole Dun and Bradstreet process, due diligence, and you get approved, and then you're able to fulfill orders. And we grew that relationship and that credit line over time. But most companies can't do that here. And the interest rates you have to pay at the bank make you immediately not competitive. You're like completely blown out of the market. So facing all of those problems, I thought, okay, this is really limiting the growth of our economy and the wealth of our people, right? Because people can't really diversify into any other assets. And pension funds also can't really diversify into other assets. So everything is stuck in SRD, and SRD is inflating massively every year. So everybody's losing a lot of value, and they don't have anywhere to put it into. And it's just even in a free and open market where it's not like that centralized, manipulated, and controlled, as you could see, with the GameStop saga, proved that market is very manipulated. Even in a free market, how it should work is that your best performers, you can invest into them, and then you get a return for that, because not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur, not everybody's going to be successful, not everybody can create that return. So we still need that dynamic here, and that's when I tried to, that's where I basically started to figure out, how are we going to do this, and how can I make Bitcoin the core of it? Like, how can you build this new system that was supposed to be developed, ever since Satoshi launched this thing? How can you build it without replicating that old system, right? And we have the opportunity here to do it from scratch, because we don't have that infrastructure whatsoever. So it's a unique situation. And back in the day, like 2018, when we launched the exchange, we had no idea how to peg it to Bitcoin. The technology wasn't really there yet. You could, and there's no way to account for the fluctuation, right? If you tie a stock or peg a stock to Bitcoin, that stock would massively fluctuate, and a company could not manage its liquidity properly. So that was a bit of a risk. So we just decided, okay, we're gonna peg it somehow to just US dollar stable. And started working on that, started working with the central bank, and that's kind of how I ended up all the way here with a lot of struggles in corruption, basically losing, I think, about 700K, all of our savings on that, because the governor was locked up, and then afterward we were working with the minister of finance, and then his son-in-law killed his grandson, and that put a kind of a stop in that, because it's a national stock exchange of a country, so you do have to work with existing government. And at a certain point, I got tired of waiting constantly. So I decided to focus on just using my talent and my skills to develop something outside of Suriname that I could, when I have enough network, when I've grown my network, when I have enough resources, could come back and then, implement change here. And then I couldn't let go, of course. Even I was going back and forth between Suriname and Switzerland. I couldn't let go, and that's how Daedalus Lab came to be. And I went to Bitcoin Miami last year, and that's where I met Samson. And then I started asking, like, okay, how do I get the Bitcoin bonds in Suriname? How do I get corporate bonds in Suriname? And at Lugano last year, actually, they told me I need to speak to Samson. Spoke to Samson at Bitcoin Miami, lobbied for Suriname again, and then started working with Gen 3, connecting them to our current government. And then we've had meetings for about a year, or sorry, a couple of months. Started about a year ago, or now started in May last year, so okay, a lot longer than a year ago. And then after all of those meetings, connected him to the central bank, the banking commission, the largest financial institutions here, basically every key player in the industry. He came over in November last year with his team, and they had several meetings here, met with the president, coordinated all, or organized, orchestrated all of that for them. And the president was very adamant about making Bitcoin legal tender and being a leader, a global leader similar to Bukele, and following in that example. And then he didn't follow through. And I found out why he didn't follow through. I mean, of course, there's some pressure from IMF and World Bank, but there's also an advisor of his that's been mining Bitcoin since 2021 that told me he doesn't want too much attention on his mining operation. So he wanted it all to stay on the down low, and making Bitcoin legal tender would attract too much attention to the country. So when I heard that was what broke the camel's back for me. Samson had already like kind of nudged me, so I keep blaming him, but he's the one that actually said, like, you should just run. So it was kind of already in my head, and when this happened, I was just so tired of all the corruption. And you kind of know that these next elections are going to be crucial for our country's development. Like, this is the last chance we have. If we don't do something differently in these next elections, they're going to steal the oil royalties that we're going to get starting 2028, and they're never going to lose grip of this country, and it's going to be Venezuela after that, right? Because it's going to be a corrupt government that has too much capital and just stays in place because they have too much capital. So we know this is our last shot. And that's when it took me a couple of months, because it's not a decision that you make lightly. I put my family's life in danger. I put my own life in danger. I already have a bit of a legacy here, so I already have received threats, and they already, after the interview came out of revealing corruption, they already told me, like, it would be just easier to liquidate me or to clean me up. So it wasn't a decision that I took lightly. You also lose your privacy, right? Your entire life is basically just that. So after a couple of months of back and forth, I decided that and also talking to, politicians here, talking to people that would have to support people in the private sector, keep people in this country, and just general population, talking to just normal people. I felt that the support was there, or is there. So, and they really do want change, and they don't have an alternative right now. There's no leader that has a vision on how to actually develop this nation, fix problems that are currently here, and diversify the economy, without just like taking money and trying to just throw money at the problem and stealing half of it anyway. That's what most of them are. They're just career politicians, and all of them are mostly old and have a history of corruption. So with all of that, I kind of decided like, okay, it's worth it to do this and to try and to give it my best shot. I mean, it's not just Suriname too, right? It's a chance to have Bitcoin be the unit of account. It's a chance to actually separate money from state. And though I have a lot of respect for Bukele and what he was able to do, changing his country from the murder capital of the world to what it is today, and everything that he's done there, I don't feel like I'm like him, and I don't feel like I want to do the same things in the country. I approach a lot of things differently. I feel like we should prioritize open source software, open source development a lot more. I feel like they have US dollar as their main currency. We have the SRD. Bitcoin should be our de facto currency, separating money from state completely and requiring us to build our economy on a Bitcoin standard and being fully transparent. And I actually don't want to be the face. I don't want to be on stages for the rest of my life or for a decade. I want to make sure that I don't have to be in charge as soon as possible, right? If we do this right, if we build it out, even if it takes 5 years or 6 years or a decade, hopefully we can actually achieve sooner rather than later that I don't need to be a president, that we don't need a president even, right? Just imagine, like the monarchs died off in the, didn't die off, but I mean they were replaced in the 20th century, right? So I feel like it's time for politicians to disappear. I feel like it's time for sovereign nations, for centralized authority to disappear. Bitcoin has been in existence for 15 years, right? It's time. And I feel like when I talk to a lot of people, they're like, oh yeah, but unit of account is the last cycle in the evolution, and it's going to take decades before that happens. But why? Like, why is it taking so long? Why are we 15 years ahead, and most of the resources have gone to Ethereum and Solana and blockchain projects, and most of the Bitcoin companies don't have capital. There's not enough resources for open source development or open source project. If Jack Dorsey didn't put money in, and things like OpenSats didn't exist, a lot of these companies wouldn't have funding. Most of them are struggling. A lot is centralized. There's a lot of unnecessary competition and ego, and a lot of fiat mentality, I feel, in this, even in the Bitcoin like maxi space. Like, even if you don't like me, you're not supposed to care, right? We're supposed to be working towards the same goal, and the goal is fighting the existing system, changing the status quo. And I feel like everybody's fighting to make a wallet, everybody's fighting to make the next cool thing, or the next layer 2, or the next this, or the next that. What about if we just collectively focus on actually changing the status quo, right? This is something that it takes 6 months. The elections are in 6 months. It doesn't cost $1 billion plus like it does in the US. And you don't have the fight with the Fed. Because let's be honest, he might be pro Bitcoin. He's going to incorporate like a crypto law. It's not going to be a Bitcoin only law, right? It's going to be a crypto law. And it's not like the system isn't going to change. He's not going to decentralize the New York Stock Exchange and suddenly change the dynamics or inequality, and the top 1% isn't suddenly going to give their power away, right? FATF is going to be just as much of a problem globally as it is right now. I feel like we need to fight that. I feel like we need to fight that centralization. And we have a unique chance here to do it. And I feel like we should be putting all of our weight into it. I've been ranting, I'm sorry.
No, I told you this is always a safe space for rants, and there's a lot to unpack there. But one of the things that stuck out to me the most the first time you came on the show, and you just brought it up again, was this idea that you want to make yourself, like if you become president, your goal is to make yourself redundant, make yourself irrelevant, basically, remove the need for you to be there. You don't want to have to be the one who's there steering the ship in order for the ship to sail successfully. You want to be able to, give that ship an autonomous navigation system and let it go, basically. And I love that because that is never something you hear from politicians these days. And I think it's because you're a Bitcoiner first and a politician, because you felt that you kind of had to, right? But I think that that's really important, this idea that you don't want to stick around forever. You don't want to have to be the one who is always needing to be there or everything's going to fall apart and go to hell. You want to put systems in place that are going to allow the country and the people to be prosperous and to be successful and to remove the ability to have such widespread corruption. I think something else you've touched on a lot is just transparency. And I want to get into a couple points here, but maybe the first place to start is, I think a lot of people think, they hear a lot of different talk about Bitcoin legal tender laws and things like that. You're talking about not just making Bitcoin legal tender, but actually making Bitcoin the de facto money of choice, like getting rid of the Suriname It dollar, not dollarizing the way many other countries do. How quickly can you put something like that into effect? Like when you are elected president, excuse me. How quickly, like, what do you view as the timeline for being able to make something like that happen? Do you anticipate any roadblocks being put up by, say, the IMF? Because we know they're not the biggest Bitcoin fans. The reason the IMF hates Bitcoin is because they know it gives individuals and nation states the power to give the IMF the middle finger. And if you want to be able to give the middle finger to monetary colonialists at the IMF and greedy central bankers alike, go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source Bitcoin only BitBox02 hardware wallet. Then get your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own self-custody. The Bitbox team is great and they build easy to use, secure, open source solutions to keep your Bitcoin safe. And maybe you don't think your Bitcoin is worth a lot now, so you're leaving it on an exchange, but things can change very quickly. And you don't want to be caught with your pants down. Plus, and I cannot emphasize this enough, but the BitBox02 is really just easy as hell to use. Whether you are brand new to Bitcoin and it's your first time setting up a hardware wallet so you're a little bit nervous, or you're a well-seasoned psychopath and you can set up a hardware wallet in your sleep. Again, the BitBox02 is fully open source. You can head to their GitHub and you can verify that for yourself. Don't trust me or Bitbox. And remember, when you go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off a great piece of open source hardware or anything else in their store, but you also help support this podcast. So seriously, thank you.
Well, it depends a lot on particularly how much capital we can, for example, raise with a bond, right? And we do have something on our side that El Salvador didn't. We have oil royalties flowing in starting 2028. So you have 2.8 billion, about a billion, depending on how much they subtract for, exploration costs. But we have capital that's going to be flowing in starting 2028, where you can do a derivative, basically, of future receivables, and you can start receiving that capital now. Right? And at a discount, of course, for investors, but make it available for development of the country. And our IMF loan, our debt is not that big, to be honest. And our Oppenheimer bond is controlled by like a handful of people in this country that stole money from the country. So their corrupt funds are even, so it's this orchestrated bond that is capturing most of the royalties that come from natural resources in this country. So we have natural resources about. We have gold in the ground, there's a gold mine that has not been developed yet that has more than 1 million troy ounce in gold deposits. So we have the resources to be able to get rid of IMF, to not need to be dependent on IMF, and that they're definitely gonna have a problem with, and all of this, just making Bitcoin legal tender. That's something that can be done in a day. It's a executive order that's, like, we're elected in May. After inauguration, it's the first thing you can do. It's just like it's a 1 day thing. It's an executive order by the Foreign Exchange Commission. It's a 1 pager that just needs to be issued. You don't need to go through Parliament for it. You don't need to change any laws. So legal tender we can do immediately. But making it the unit of account, for that we will need to have a structured process to it. So for that, we've created a transformation commission, and we're rounding up Austrian economists right now. Philip Bagas is leading that team, and my program manager, Stefan Runs, he is leading the whole program, so that once elected, all of this can actually be rolled out. And how quickly we can roll it out depends on, whether we're able to issue that bond to, for example, pay off IMF sooner, or strategically come up with a solution for that, and how we transition from the SRD to Bitcoin as unit of account. What laws need to be changed, how quickly we implement that. I think it can be done in a year, to be honest. Similar to Bukele being able to massively change the country within a year. I do think that we're small, we're agile, our economy is not that big, right? It's a pretty small economy, it's a pretty small sized population. So you can actually transition into it faster. And the reason why I say that is because it's not the first time that a currency has been replaced. It's happened a couple of times here before. And basically, we also have a dollar and a euro, as legal tender in Suriname. So people do also use euro and dollar. So if they want to hedge, or diversify risk away from Bitcoin, they can also, just use dollar and euro like they're used to. I don't feel like we should also force people, to only use Bitcoin. I feel like they should still have some freedom of choice, even if the fiat world will be collapsing. Eventually, they will see that it is worth less over time, in comparison to Bitcoin. But I think we have a unique chance to actually separate money from state, and like you said, right? There's not many people in the world that would give up power. Most people want power, and I don't want power. I don't want the spotlight. I don't want to be I hate doing this, to be honest. I hate podcasts. I hate talking. I hate hearing myself afterwards, so I don't ever watch them. So preferably I wouldn't have to do this. Preferably I would not have to go on stage. Preferably I would not have to fly to a conference and do all of that and do all these interviews and do all of this, to be honest. Preferably I would just, I'm pretty much an introvert. I would just like to live my own life and in my little bubble. So I do think we have a unique chance to change things and to show the rest of the world that it can be done and how it can be done, similar to, where El Salvador led in the charge. I think we can make an example of what a country can actually be like if you don't have centralized leadership. Just look at Switzerland, right? I don't know who leads Switzerland. If you show me a face, I wouldn't recognize him, to be honest. I think I recognize the mayor of Lugano before I know who's, on the federal team, to be honest. Same. Right? So I feel like it could be here, and I feel like technology is there, right? We're in 2024. Technology is already far enough for us to be able to do this. So why wouldn't we do it? Why wouldn't we want a country where, you wouldn't lock up samurai, right? Where
Right.
you wouldn't lock up Julian Assange, where freedom is just embedded into the law and human rights are actually protected and open source development is actually stimulated versus a Google or a Facebook or Instagram, right? Where you actually focus on supporting innovative open source solutions that empower the new internet, that empower, protocols like Bitcoin and Nostr. So the tech is already there. The tech is already there for, like, who's going to build the roads? We can build a platform that decides who builds the roads transparently, right? That isn't vulnerable to corruption. The technology is already there. Like, why aren't we doing it? Why is the world still this shit? Why is there so much poverty? Why is there so much war? It's that same centralized system. And we say Bitcoin fixes this, but if we don't fucking do anything, when is it going to fix it? Right? Are we going to have World War III before Bitcoin actually fixes it? Or is this an actual opportunity for us to actually fix it? So I feel like we should all be like fighting for this and when working towards the same common goal. And instead of like, having egos play, I need to build multi-billion, like, who the fuck cares about the fiat value anyway? I'm sorry. Who cares
You're
about the
good.
fiat value? Right? Who cares about it anyway? It's not going to matter. Like, if we all get nuked, like, probably we won't. We're South America, nobody cares. But if Europe goes back into war, if the Middle East escalates, if the US gets attacked or China escalates, if any of this escalates and it actually happens, and if we keep going the way we're going, and 80% of the world, poverty increases, the wealth gap increases, like, where are we even heading, and why are we not like making like a decision to change it now when we actually have the chance, right? And I don't know. I see, for example, like Madeira getting so much support, but Madeira is European, right? It's EU. Do you really think the ECB is not going to fight for CBDCs? Do you really think that the US is not going to fight for Fed now? Do you really think that these large powers aren't going to fight for more control? And if it's not them, don't you think that Sam Altman, like, what's the name of the thing again?
Oh,
WorldCoin?
WorldCoin? Yeah.
Yeah, don't you think that centralized powers like that aren't gonna, enforce their will? Like, everyone's, it looks like, is placing their bets on these countries that are in these jurisdictions where you are fighting against the ECB. And then eventually, after a while, nothing really comes out of it. Like, nothing really changes, nothing really substantial happens, right? And then you can tell me, okay, low time preference. Sure, great. But I have 6 months here. How about we try it here and try it a little bit differently this time?
Amen. And I think that what you said is so important about this. The technology exists right now. We have the ability to make substantive change. But so much effort is perhaps more focused on just the NGU component rather than the freedom go up component. People forget that it's really nice, Bitcoin's this incredible technology, but it doesn't really mean much unless you actually use it for what it is, which is a way to separate money and state. And I think, at least in America, the narrative seems to have very much shifted. And I won't cast a blanket on everybody, but a lot of what I've seen has been more so, well, this is actually going to be something that very much strengthens the US dollar, and, the institutions are already here, and that's actually a good thing. And Bitcoin's for anyone who wants it. Of course, the institutions were going to show up. Of course, if the United States has smart politicians, they are going to try and print dollars and buy Bitcoin. It would be stupid of them not to, right? But at the same time, I think what you just said about remembering that the point of this is actually the separation of money and state. And thankfully, as long as Bitcoin remains decentralized and secure, any government is free to print dollars or euros and to buy Bitcoin. That doesn't mean that they control Bitcoin. And it's still not in their interest to try and subvert the network, because then, their investment becomes worth less. And, we fork off and things get dark for a while, but then the strongest chain still emerges. But I'm curious, kind of, you have such a great focus on actually using technology for the betterment of people, and for, again, making yourself eventually redundant. And you've talked about transparency a lot as well. One of the things that you've talked about in the last time we talked, but then also at your talk in Amsterdam, was this idea of like a sovereign wealth fund or universal basic income, but not in the typical way that people think about it. You've talked about actually using the liquid network to distribute this, to make it all completely transparent and traceable, and at the same time being able to get rid of income taxes entirely, because Suriname is such a resource-rich country, as long as the resources aren't being stolen by corrupt officials, right, and the money from that. So can you talk about that a little bit more, and kind of your vision for how, what kind of changes do people end up seeing if and when you get into power and you're able to say, okay, we're getting rid of this corruption because we're making things transparent. Do you still plan to, get rid of income taxes to try and have a new form of UBI as well, based on resources?
Yeah, I mean, right now, the point is making myself redundant, making government redundant, right? Making everything just services based, focus on the people, because that's what government's supposed to be. It's supposed to serve the people, right? But there's also a lot of power that goes to government because they have these resources, and they have the power over these natural resources, and they have the power over these royalties, right? If you decentralize the flow of royalties and the flow of income, for example, from that sovereign wealth fund, and flow that directly to the people, then there's no longer government control over those natural resources and the majority of the wealth. And wealth goes directly to the people. And I think that transparency, that level of, just basically funds going directly to where they're supposed to be, instead of having these intermediaries, I think that's going to have a massive impact on just the economy, right? Because that's going to create this flywheel where people can actually just decide for themselves what they want to do with their own money. Like if you look at, for example, in Europe, the majority of my family lives in the Netherlands, and they're complaining about government overreach, about the increase in taxes, the exit tax that's coming. It's constant, basically government taking, and I've seen it, evolve over the last 35 years as I go back and forth between Europe and here. Government keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into their pockets, right? And controlling almost every aspect of their life. Like when I'm in Europe, I feel so claustrophobic almost, right? Like everything is controlled. You're not free. So after like three weeks to 3.5 weeks, I really feel the need to come back here. So you want to prevent that from happening here, but you also want to, when we change how the economy, if you change the mechanics of how an economy works, if you're building this system that Satoshi intended that we built, that is not centralized, where you have, not inequality, but actually funds flowing directly to the people. You don't have the fractional reserve banking system. You don't have the central bank controlling, the reserve requirement, for example, a percentage of the people's money. You don't have this centralization of capital, but you have full transparency over that economy. I think you can, like Elon right now is focusing on efficiency in government, right? Just imagine a small population, 600,000. It's 7% of the country that is populated. It's very small in terms of area. It's like a little town. It's like a little U.S. town if you want to imagine what it looks like. It's old colonial buildings in the city. There's no towers. There's no skyscrapers. It's not what you're used to in any city. Just imagine how you can kind of like I can like see it in front of me if I get this image of I was at MIT Media Lab and they had this Lego structure for how they rebuilt cities, and are making like green cities in Spain and in France, and I'm looking at it and I think we can just do the same thing with our city, but do the same thing with the economy. Just pick the pieces, rearrange them, and since it's right now resources basically flowing to salaries anyway, like half of our working population works for government. So it's basically already, going to the people, but now it's going in a way where it's government in between and it's inefficient, and we have inflation, and inflation is like what, 50, 60%. So it's taking a lot of their wealth anyway. So if you have these resources going directly to the people, you have Bitcoin as the unit of account. So everybody's earning their salary in Bitcoin, right? You transition just one day, similar to what they did with the other currency, just one day where everybody exchanges or has to exchange their current currency for new currency. You finance that, the transition of that, basically. Then you have this entire transparent system where everybody's just free to transact globally, right? Without limitations, because I'm not going to create a Chivo wallet. Like, people have a wallet of choice. Like, they can do, if they want to do Strike, they can do Strike. If they want to do Blink, they can do Blink. I really do not care. I feel very strongly about being a free and open market and people having choice, right? And if it being open source. So we don't want centralization. We don't want control of people's transactions and wallets. So I think that will create an economy of abundance for everyone immediately. And I think it'll just like rapidly change this country within a very short time frame. I think 2-3 years, this country could be maybe one of the most developed in the world. And developed does not have to look like, skyscrapers. It doesn't have to look like, concrete jungle. It could just be paradise, and it can just be paradise with, a lot of green, but just happy people living instead of in this mill, this another brick wall factory, just living life. Like, I think we had this conversation in Prague about family, and going back to family values and just like making family a priority and making just life a priority. And I feel like Bitcoiners have that because I don't know, if you're deep enough down the rabbit hole, you start reprioritizing your life, right? And your time. And I feel like if you have an entire country where everybody just does that, and I think a prime example is, I think it was a Gridless commercial or a Fetty commercial, one of the two. And the guy had this machine that was making his production skills better from this village, right? But at the end of the commercial, they ask him like, what does he really want? And then at the end of the video, he says he wants to make more kids. So,
It's beautiful.
At the end of the video, all he wants, like, he doesn't care about being more productive or making more money, or he just cared about, increasing the size of his family and making more kids. So I think we can make a real shift here, to what we really focus on. I mean, we can focus on certain industries. Like I would love to have a Large Hadron Collider here. I would love to have nuclear mini reactors here. Like I would love to have that be our main source of energy. I'd love to have a launch base here. Elon needs to decrease the price of his payloads, and we're degrees from the equator, so it would make it more efficient and cheaper to launch rockets from here, similar to next door in French Guiana. Less rocket fuel, more payload, basically, so more profit. So I'd love to have something like that here, for example, and things that don't need to destroy the entire Amazon rainforest, because I feel like we have beautiful, pristine nature here, and it really, like, once you go into it, it refreshes your soul. Like you feel like a completely new and different human being, and you're so grounded, and it's different than anywhere else that I've seen, like in Bali or beaches anywhere else in the world. It's just a different feeling, because it's like you go back in time, I don't know, 1,000 years or something, and you go out into nature. So I feel like we need to preserve that. And I think we have a unique opportunity to change how people live. And, you know, it just like with the campaign alone, for example, right? With the Geyser Fund, we're raising funds transparently, like everybody can see. And all of the funds we raise, it's all going on an Excel sheet, like similar to Start Small, but we're taking it a step further where you can actually see how the money is being spent. It's not being spent on a campaign trail where I'm doing photo ops and all that bullshit. It's actually being spent on social impact. We want to do a food kitchen. So right now I'm getting supplies for a food, or we're making a list of supplies for the food kitchen, and then we're gonna feed underserved communities, orphanages, old people's homes, places that are really suffering right now because of the economy and the situation. And we're looking for a location for a community center in Ephraimzegen, which is one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in the country. They don't have toilets. They don't have, like, it's really, really, really bad. People don't have like any hope for a future. So we want to build a community center there where we build, like a playground where they can learn about tech and they can learn tech skills. Like it doesn't take that long to learn HTML, Java, CSS, right? It takes a couple of days, a couple of weeks max if you're not very fast. But learning how to develop on Lightning after that, learning how to do React or Rust, and be able to earn income from anywhere in the world, I think that will change their lives significantly. So we really want to change the way that like politicians campaign, right? And I feel like if you have this one example of someone doing it somewhere in the world that shows like, hey, the money isn't being given in backdoor deals, and you don't have just billions of dollars flowing in, or hundreds of millions of dollars, or $30 million flowing in, and it just going into an election and you have no idea how it was spent. You can actually see how it was spent. So I think that's going to change the dynamics of how people are voted into office, and it's going to make it, transparency will create more efficiency, right? Because people are going to have to compete based off of like actual results. Like they're going to have to work for results and visible, tangible results, because everybody can see what they're spending money on. And if you're spending, maybe not this election, but people can see how much you spent in the last election, and they can see, hey, that guy spent like 250 million or 500 million on advertising, right? And she spent 500 million on communities and changing these communities. So that's going to, I think, change the way people even get into office. So we're changing the way people get nominated, like get elected. But I think also, like Stefan and I have brainstormed about this as well. Like if we take everything that we're doing right now, and we share that with the rest of the world, right? The whole program, how you roll it out, everything just open source, everybody can copy it. Then they have no choice than to have to copy it, right? Because if the 99%, if the rest of us see like, hey, this is possible there. Oh, and this is exactly how they did it and how they do it and how you can do it and how we can do it, then they can force their politicians to do that, because only then only the politicians that are doing that same approach will be able to win, right? Like I really believe that this will give power back to the people and change like the way we vote people into office, or like maybe even never need people in office anymore after this whole transition.
And I mean, what you're describing it, this you retweeted a Jack Dorsey post from, I think he posted earlier in November maybe, but it was a David Clark saying, where is there, it's we reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code. And that's essentially what you're suggesting. It's this rules without rulers. It's the idea of anarchy, not the Mad Max kind of anarchy that people think of, but like actual anarchy, which is peaceful cooperation, a set of rules, and no rulers that are going to always become corrupt. And
Yeah.
I'm curious if you've thought at all just about the actual voting process. I'm not sure how much, given that there's all the corruption you've talked about and the violence that your family has personally experienced for trying to call out this corruption, is the voting process equally corrupt? Have you thought at all about implementing something like a simple proof like they did in Guatemala? Any sort of those, time chain based, publicly auditable type systems for voting? Because it is a smaller voter base, and maybe that's something that would at least, make sure that the election is going to be fair and the votes that you get are going to really be counted.
Yeah, so that is one thing that hasn't been able to be manipulated here yet.
Okay.
Because it is very transparent. So all political parties have a presence at all voting offices, and it's all open. So everybody can see, and you have people from, it's not like Venezuela where, they don't allow OAS to come in, or outside authorities to come in and kind of like observe and see if things are actually happening transparently. Voting, that's the one thing here I think that they find really hard to manipulate. They tried in 2020 to burn some, but then citizens, like just civilians, went to where the votes were being stored, and then they just slept there. Like I know the activists that actually went there, put up a hammock, and with a bunch of others, like a bunch of friends of ours, they all went there and they all stayed there all night and just watched and made sure that they couldn't come in and steal anything or manipulate anything. So it is pretty transparent here. It's really hard to manipulate, and we will suggest it. We will we'll lobby for it, but because it's it doesn't hurt to have that in place. But the odds of them being able to manipulate votes, that's very, very small. Like it's not as big as as the US, for example, where you have mail-in votes and things like that. This is it's very small. Like it's I have to go to a local school, and my entire community is there, and everybody's watching. Everybody can see you go in and out, and everybody can see the boxes going in and out. So everybody, and every political party as well. It's a multi-party system. It's not a two-party system. So every political party has a presence there as well, and they're all monitoring it. So the odds of that happening are very small.
That's good to know, at least, because obviously that was a concern I had was, you're suggesting some pretty radical, but I think realistic and necessary change, but the powers that are entrenched often don't like that kind of realism and optimism and desire for radical change. And so I'm glad to hear that at least you have a less of a shit show of a system than we have in the United States, which is always just like it's it's genuinely kind of like, I think it should be a national embarrassment in the US that we're the richest country in the world and we can't seem to figure out voting. Like the thing that everybody
It's not
claims
just
is so
voting, like your
important.
healthcare system, your
Yeah.
tax system,
Oh God.
education, like
Preach.
pharmaceutical industry. Yeah, there's a lot that's
Uh,
a little bit iffy over there. There's this episode of I think it was The Newsroom where he goes on a rant why America is no longer the greatest country in the world anymore. And I think one of the points that he mentioned was, you have your defense spending is more than the next 40 countries combined, and they're all allies. So that
yeah.
disproportion is also insane, and it's been increasing more and more. So yeah, I'm
Well,
I'm very sorry about that.
yeah, it's I do have hope for America.
Yeah.
Because like, and I am very I'm proud to be American. I love America in the sense of the American idea and the American people. I very obviously don't love the American government. I don't think you should love your government. I think that if you
No.
say like, oh, I love whoever's in charge, like, then you're probably not thinking very critically right now. Like at least in America. But enough about America for now, because we could spend far too much time
Yeah.
talking about the problems that we have here. But this is why I love. I think that Suriname is a really fascinating country, and your plans for Suriname are really fascinating because it is a country that, because it is small, you have the ability to make really drastic and important changes that genuinely affect every single citizen's life. It doesn't have to be big and slow moving like the US is. It doesn't have the same sort of, it has different entrenched power structures, but at a different scale. And so it gives me a lot of hope that, especially seeing the passion that you have for your country and for the people of Suriname, that you will actually be able to make substantive changes in a short amount of time. With, similar to how Bukele has done, but as you've said, I think you have a different approach than he does. And I'm kind of curious as well for people who may listen to this and say, wow, all of these things that Maya's suggesting sound pretty darn good. Maybe I want to come out, and maybe I'm in the EU, maybe I'm wherever. Maybe I want to come check out Suriname. Do you envision Suriname being a place that will be friendly to expatriates from other countries? Will you try to attract digital nomads, Bitcoiners generally? Foreign investment from companies? Do you want companies to move there? How do you kind of view that angle of things? Because we've talked a lot about the things you can do for the people of the country, but do you want that population to expand with immigration as well?
Yeah, I mean, we do want to attract talent, right? And we do need a bit more people. It is very, very small. But you want to avoid gentrification. So I think if you have Bitcoin as a unit of account, by the default, de facto, else's currency will be, worth less faster. So you'll have to come sooner rather than later. So I think that way we can prevent a lot of gentrification. Um, I do think it is important not to have too much industrialization. So, and I don't, for example, want a Google head office here. Like, we don't want to encourage more centralized big tech companies, to be honest. So, if Nostr companies want to have an office here, sure, we can build a Nostr center or something like that. I think we need to focus on where we want the world to be heading in 2050, 2070, and where we want the continent to be heading, right? Because it's like my vision isn't just Suriname, it's how do we connect the entirety of the continent? Like, how do I do more trade with El Salvador? How do we get that train that Bukele was also talking about to get that from El Salvador all the way to Suriname, and all the way to Brazil? How do we develop, and look forward? So I think it's very important to, have the doors open for people, have a digital nomad program, and attract foreign talent and attract more people to come here. But we do need to aware that we don't want pollution, we don't want over tourism, we don't want gentrification, we don't want to put our own people, outside of like what's happening in some other Latin American countries where they can't even afford a home because the whole neighborhood is outpriced and they have to move to somewhere else. So you don't want to create situations like that. But there are ways to prevent gentrification from happening. There are ways to build sustainably and develop the country sustainably, attract foreign direct investment, um, by and making sure that foreign direct investment, for example, does incorporate enough local content for people to grow, in terms of skills, but not just in terms of wealth, but also in terms of skills, locally as well. So, and I think we can, instead of having these huge behemoths like Microsoft, like Google, I feel like we should be building more solutions that can scale to other jurisdictions without being the main funnel, subtracting wealth from the rest of the world. I feel like we can be a start for something that spreads. It lays a foundation for wealth that spreads and a future of abundance that spreads.
And just speaking of laying foundations, in addition to being very busy campaigning for president, you've also been doing a lot of just grassroots Bitcoin adoption work, education, onboarding merchants. Like, I don't know how you have the time, but I've seen there seems to have been a lot of growth in that recently. So you're approaching this both from the top down and the bottom up, it seems, at the same time. Maybe the goal is to meet somewhere in the middle, but can you talk a little bit just about kind of some of the grassroots community work you're doing around Bitcoin adoption, education, and anything else?
Well, to be completely honest, the grassroots adoption took a lot of preparation and a lot of dreaming and a lot of preparing. And we didn't have much funding. Last year I was complaining a lot about funding being an issue. And it's only recently that we got a grant from Bitcoin Beach and we got funding. So it's only recently that I was able to expand the team. And in all honesty, all I do is tell them how to approach things and how, like, for example, it's being done in Uvita and how it's being done in Brazil and how it's being done in El Salvador. And I just tell, like, I knew, for example, the first time, 2 times, I think they went out to do merchant onboarding. It wasn't really successful. I think they also didn't have the courage and or didn't feel like they could, because I literally took, like our cleaning lady and told her, like, you shouldn't be cleaning houses for the rest of your life. Here's something that you could be doing and it can grow into more, and you can start teaching and learning more and learning about money and learning about tech, and you can grow into this. So I went out with them, I think it was the second or third time, and then I started doing the merchant onboarding in front of them. And then once they saw how easy it was by me just doing it, that's when they replicated it. And the Me Premier courses, all that, I just kind of helped the setup, but all of the work, like most of it, is the team right now. Like it's completely taken on a life of its own. They are on their own, creating content, coming up with new ideas, where to go, how to go about it. Terrence, who's amazing. He's grown up like so much in this space, and he's in Praia in Jerry Cocoara right now with Fernando, and Fernando's training him. And then Terrence is going to come back and have another big impact on grassroots adoption. And there's some other projects that like we've been working on for about a year, in the rural villages to create like an actual Bitcoin standard grassroots, like having energy converted through mining into Bitcoin, and that being the source of income for that village. And then they can't really use SRD because it's the value is, it doesn't translate if they need to travel to the city. The cost is too much. So for them it would actually be better if they can just only transact in Bitcoin. So that would solve a massive problem for those villages. So we've been working on that for about a year. And then I really at this point am just trying to find an investor for the solar grid, for the mining, and then basically just connecting the village with Amazon conservation team and with the solar company. And then after that, I don't have to do anything anymore, basically. So it's a lot of planning and just preparing, and it takes like a year of that or 6 months of that. And then the whole thing just leads a life of its own. So I'm not very like, I'm not running around all day. I am busy all day, but it's not like I know how to manage teams pretty well, so I can manage multiple teams at the same time, and that helps a lot with this. Otherwise, I would have been dead by now, and I am excruciatingly tired, but it's fine. I was crying this morning. I was crying last night. It's not easy, but you kind of push through it. And I think the team right now that we have, because I'm going to be involved in setting up the soup kitchen and setting up the community center. So that's an important piece. But once that's set up as well, then I'm hands off again. And the campaign itself, we're joining I don't want to reveal yet. We're going to reveal it next month. I'm going to be joining one of the largest parties in the country. So they already have a chance at majority seats, and we're just going to add onto that and make sure that together, because you have to form a coalition. It's a multi-party system. You have to work with other parties, and we're going to, by happenstance, work with the party that I always voted for. And they already have guaranteed seats, right? Based off of previous elections, you can kind of see how many seats they'd get in next year with one man, one vote. So we already know like how many seats we can get at a minimum and how much effort we can put in to try and get more votes and get more seats, so we can actually have more decision making in who the president will actually be. So that's going to be also team effort. It's not just me working, like it's not a one-man show. It's a lot of moving parts. We have I have a team internationally that's helping. Like Stefan is very, it's XEY, very, very, very independent, can do his own thing. I don't need to micromanage. So a lot of it is also just people contributing what they're good at. And that's in international community and the local community as well. So I'll survive.
Well, you mentioned looking for like a potential investor to kind of partner with this grassroots initiative. I imagine, are you looking for something kind of similar to the situation in Bitcoin Beach, where you're able to have somebody who really wants to come in and help to develop these local circular economies? Is that kind of the goal?
That would be great. Yeah, if we have something similar to Bitcoin Beach, and more people like if I can be replaced, I'd be one of the happiest people on the planet. If someone else can take this over, and the grassroots adoption in the rural villages, what I'm talking about, that's more kind of like gridless. So it's more microgrids, small scale mining, and small villages, and making sure, because a lot of them, like one of the villages, we just got a quote for it's 26,000 to repair their solar grid. It's a battery system, so you can mine Bitcoin when they're not using electricity. And the villages, for example, the chief, he's open to increasing the capacity, increasing the size of that grid, so that we can add more mining to it, so that it becomes more feasible. But basically, it'll have to be a joint venture between the mining company or the Suriname gridless, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm not going to run that. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to connect you. I'm going to make sure you can do it. I did all the groundwork for you. You can come and do it, but I'm not going to do it. I don't want to be a shareholder. I don't need to do anything. I don't want to earn money off of it. You can do it yourself. And then it's going to have to be a joint venture between the company and the village itself, so that they also, earn something from it, basically.
So if you're somebody who wants to, who likes this message and wants to get involved, and you're listening to this, reach out to Maya so that you can get your hands out of it. as
yeah, exactly.
So
take some of the load off my shoulders. I need some help.
Yeah, no, it sounds like, well, and I mean, speaking of that, so this this geyser campaign that you've done has been like really successful, and I hope for anybody who's either watching this in the live stream or who listens to this or watches it later, I'll link it in the show notes. You can go down to it. You can donate yourself. I highly recommend people do so if they like what you've been saying. You know, I'm curious, beyond that, monetary donations, which are obviously probably the most helpful, but are there other ways that people, maybe if there are Bitcoiners listening to this who are not from Suriname, but who say, boy, I really love this. I want to support this Bitcoin adoption. I want to support Maya. Are there ways for them to get involved and to help?
Take a gap year, quit your fiat job and come down.
There we go.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty easy.
Yeah, it's 6 months until the elections, and the grassroots adoption is not, that has nothing to do with the campaign. It doesn't matter whether I'm elected or not. The party's going to get seats anyway. I'm going to push these policies anyway. So you might as well just come down, quit the fiat job, just imagine being in El Salvador early days, and just come down and help. Like, we already have a couple of Bitcoiners that have moved. We have a couple that want to move. And I think a lot are waiting to, I've seen a couple say that they're waiting for me to be elected until they come. You'll have a lot more freedom here than you do in the US or in Europe anyway. So you're already winning if you're coming here, and your money is worth a lot more here, either way. So if you work remote, it's a great place to come out and help and start and be a part of what's happening here and contribute. And, whether I win or not, like 6 months, a year here, trust me, it'll change your life. I don't think you'll ever move back.
It's a compelling offer, I've got to say. I'm curious, as you look to the future, you've talked about wanting to make yourself ultimately redundant in terms of when you are elected. What do you view as kind of like that long-term vision for Suriname? Because it's obviously a country that has had plenty of problems because it's been plagued with corruption. It's been preyed on by the IMF. It's a small country, and maybe people tend to overlook it. But you've got some pretty big plans. How do you view Suriname taking on a larger role in the world stage, becoming sort of one of those smaller tech hubs, becoming a place that is known for, being future forward? Like, do you think that this can be a model for other countries as well?
Yeah, I was invited to MIT to interview, and then I lobbied, of course, because I can't let go, for the same thing, for Suriname, the innovation hub, and it's MIT, so the number one innovation university in the world. And I enrolled Suriname, had the honor to enroll Suriname into their MIT REAP program, which is actually the program for the past decades that has developed these innovation hubs all over the world. So we're already enrolled in that program, and we can, with the program, also create a development plan for 2030, 2050, and keep reiterating on that every decade or every 20 years, for example, and keep improving on it. And ultimately, like on my own career map, I put after this fixing the UN, because I believe it's the most inefficient, hypocritical, bureaucratic institution in the world. So either replacing it or making that more efficient. So I think once I'm like 45, 50, being able to tackle that challenge. But I do have a focus on making Suriname like an innovation hub and an example, but like focusing on regional development, because we're I think I said this in the interview before too, we're like little islands that trade with our former colonizers, with the US, but we don't really trade with each other. So trading with Argentina, trading with El Salvador, trading with Colombia, trading with our neighbors, trading with Brazil, and building infrastructure in between our nations, because that's missing. We don't have roads that connect us. We don't have trains that connect us. So that could be improved upon. Being more of the lungs for the planet, being food provider for each other and for ourselves, and yeah, fixing the UN, to be honest, because that is so broken.
It really is. And I'm curious too, because somebody you were just mentioning, you want this to be an innovation hub, you want this to be a tech hub. You've mentioned earlier that you want this to be an open source hub as well.
Mm-hmm.
Someone just asked in the chat if do you plan to try and get rid of the extradition treaty with the U.S. just to be able to really protect open source developers who may be building freedom tools, but that the government the U.S. government, I should say, doesn't really like? Is that something that can be done? Is it easy to get out from under the boot of the U.S. extradition treaty in that regard?
We don't have a treaty.
There is none right now.
No. Like,
Oh,
no.
okay.
Otherwise, some of our like politicians would be locked up already.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah, the son, for example, of like they have to be in or international waters, I think, or U.S. waters. Like I remember it was, I think it was a little over a decade ago. They actually had people, two people that they locked up that were on a cruise ship, and they diverted the cruise ship into U.S. waters to be able to get them with a helicopter. So I'd have to like I don't know everything, to be honest. So I'm not sure, but I think it's not in place because otherwise I do think that some of our politicians they're on the Interpol list, so they would already be locked up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Well,
yeah, I mean I'm free Ross, right? I was very much against Julian Assange being held as a political prisoner for that long. So yes, we protect freedom of speech. We welcome Edward Snowden. We would protect, the integrity of freedoms, and we wouldn't bow down to the U.S. Like this is not going to help me in the elections, but no, we would not bow down to the U.S. or the EU, to be honest. And I feel like that's an important thing to do. I feel like it's very important to stand up to FATF. This money laundering overreach that is going into every country in the world and they use terrorism. Like they've been using 9/11, 2001, no offense. I mean, it's a horrible thing that happened, but they've been using 9/11 to, to be like it created such a monster internationally, right? They're enforcing so much government overreach. Like the US is overreaching in every country in the world. Like you have this crazy travel rule. You have AML, KYC requirements that are insane, right? And restricting
nuts.
people's freedoms. And I feel like we should be fighting that. And we should be going to WEF and calling them out on this. Like I went to WEF, I think I was living in Davos for a year back and forth, and I went to Undavos, like the conference surrounding WEF where Plan B was. And I thought I was going to orange pill WEF, to be honest. I thought I was going to, convince everybody that Bitcoin was the future and that they needed to do that. So I do feel like we need to have more voices like Bukele, calling out the US Fed. And we need more voices. We need more leaders standing up to US government overreach, because it is only to protect the war machine. It is only to protect their own interests. I mean, we know this, right? It is only to protect the printing, endless money printing, and to protect the power and control that they have in the rest of the world. And it's so entrenched in all of our lives that like think of one thing that you don't need to ask the government for permission for at this point, right? There is so much. So I feel like we need to fight against that. And I feel like we need to have more leaders that fight against that. And I think it's Max that always says this, like the dominoes are going to fall. I think it's time that we actually tip them the fuck over and make them fall. And that we actually fight against this shit, that we fight against KYC AML overreach, that we fight against FATF, that we fight against the IMF and World Bank, and actually put a stop to this. because we can, if we have enough, right? If the masses, if we all collaborate, if we all decide, and if in every country someone like me stands up and decides to go for office, or decides to convince their politicians, like, hey, this is happening in Suriname, we can do it here. Like, look, this is how they did it. This is the policy, Bitcoin policy website. Like, you can use that. You can use what they did in Suriname, and more countries will turn over the next 5 years, right? I see it happening in 5 years. With AI, with technology advancing as it is, it has to happen rapidly, and it's going to happen rapidly. So I think we should just do it. Let's just go.
I love it, and I think that's a pretty great note to wrap up on, Maya. I appreciate you sharing so much of your time with me. I know you have a lot of stuff going on right now, and I really appreciate it. And I hope people will listen to this and take a lot of value from it. Is there anything else you want to leave people with? Anywhere you want to send people? I'll make sure to link the Geyser page, your Nostr and X in the show notes as well. But anywhere else you want to send people, or anything else you want to leave them with?
Well, I'd say the Bitcoin Suriname page as well, and we'll be adding more social impact, because there's quite some things wrong here. There's kids that need transplants and they don't have the funding to be able to afford the surgery. So we'll be posting more things like that on Geyser, and just keep an eye out and contribute whatever way you can. Like, even if it's a few sats, even if it's a few cents, like it adds up, if it's a lot of people doing it. So whatever you can miss, just try and support and try and help out, because we really, it's a small economy, and we're really struggling here too. It's not just in Africa. It's not just in some Middle Eastern countries. We also have a collapsing economy and collapsing healthcare. So whatever you can do to support, just please help.
Yeah, and if you can spare a few sats, which I know many of you listening can, send them over, because this is a damn good cause. And I want to thank you again for sharing your time with me. This was really a treat, and I look forward to talking to you again. Hopefully the next time we come on here, maybe I'll be interviewing the president of Suriname. I'm feeling pretty good about your chances, and I think that you bring a really amazing message of hope and optimism for people, and not just people in Suriname, but people all over who are sick and tired of their governments, and who are ready for a fresh voice and a fresh face and a fresh set of ideas. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you for having me and letting me spread the message. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
Thanks.
And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring the Bitcoin Podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor, or send an email to hello@bitcoinpodcast.net. If you are enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast and find it valuable, give it a boost on Fountain, a 5-star review wherever you're listening, or better yet, share this show with your network so more people can learn about Bitcoin. Or don't. Bitcoin doesn't care, but I sure do appreciate it. You can grab links in the show notes to watch or listen to this show wherever you get your podcasts, or go to bitcoinpodcast.net/podcast. And you'll also find the links to follow me and the show on Nostr and on X. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million. But Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to the Bitcoin Podcast. Until next time, stay free.